joining us on Career Journeys, where we share stories that inspire. I have an amazing person with me today, and we're going to be jumping right in and just delving deep into his career journey. I know that this segment is going to be very inspiring. There'll be a lot to learn, a lot to pick up, a lot of things that will help in our different careers. Now, my guest today is none other than Shola Oshinoiki. I call him Pastor Shola because we have that kind of relationship. Um, Welcome, Pastor Shola.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you for
for
having me.
thank you for being here. I'm going to read a few things from your LinkedIn bio, LinkedIn profile, and then I'll just let you introduce yourself. So, on your LinkedIn profile, it says that you are an author, a speaker, a founder, a SaaS strategist, an angel investor, and a coach and mentor. That is a lot. Would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Okay, so my name is Shalosh Noiki, British born Nigerian, just to kind of start off there. I currently run two organizations. One is Josh Leadership Academy, where I do coaching and mentoring. And I also run a company called Josh Leadership Limited, where I do consulting. My background is that I spent a lot of time in the human resource technology space, so implementing large software as a service applications globally around the world. And we'll come to that in a second. But
Mm.
that's my background, and that's kind of where I do my consulting. But like you said, I'm an author, I'm a speaker. I'm involved in angel investing. That's probably the newest thing I've been involved in the last 3 years. So there's a lot in the story, but there's been a long journey and career. So hopefully we can unpack some of that. And one of the things I like about this program is the stories that inspire, and I hope my story today will inspire somebody.
I'm sure it will. If nobody else, it will inspire me, but I'm sure it will inspire so many other people. And so what's your 9 to 5? What do you do?
So my
Nine to
nine to five
five.
at the moment, and I think it's very important that we put a time stamp. So my 9 to 5 up until the 30th of April was that I worked for a multinational, which was a technology investor who's invested in many organizations, about 85 organizations around the world in about 110 different countries. I used to head up their human resource and technology division globally. So my 9 to 5 up until about 3 weeks ago was purely kind of focused on that. But now that I'm working for myself, my 9 to 5 is including an element of delivering services to my new consulting clients and also building relationships with some of the companies I am sitting on a non-executive board position for or pursuing my sales pipeline. So it's a very different 9 to 5 than it used to be, but it's interesting and dynamic.
Oh wow, that is amazing. Now, how does one set oneself up to be as valuable as you are? I know that um, you are very busy, but you are not just busy because you like to do stuff. You are busy because you are valuable and you had a lot of value in different spaces. What has that journey been like? How have you become such a valuable person who can offer value in all these different spaces?
Well, that's a loaded question, but a good question too. So I think maybe if we at this point start from the very beginning, which is always a good place to start. So I went to university in Nigeria, Obafemi Awolowo University, studied civil engineering. I did my national youth service there, which is a compulsory 1 year program where I was building roads and bridges and market stalls. And then after my national youth service, I couldn't find a job in Lagos. And therefore, my fiance at the time had moved to the UK. And I decided that, well, since I was British born, I might as well move to the UK. On getting to the UK, I discovered that there were no jobs for engineers. So,
Mm.
and I didn't want to sit around doing nothing. So I actually went into security and started working as a security guard. And I think the biggest lesson, I think this applies across my whole career, is the fact that I looked at it that even though I'm working in security, I use the concept of whatever your hand finds to do, do it as unto the Lord. So I think understanding that there's no condition that is permanent, number one. And then number two, understanding that your uniform doesn't define you. So the fact that I was
Mm,
wearing a security guard uniform doesn't change the fact that I had a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and I could actually build roads and bridges. So I think the main thing I started with was don't let your job, your uniform define who you
mm,
are. Know who you are and recognize that you add value and continue to add value. And I think I will kind of kick off with one key story of that when I moved from security to the University of Manchester, where I did my first graduate placement. I think in my interview, the person who interviewed me, John Wilson, Deputy Director of Estates and Services, he said, for the last 18 months of your career, quote unquote, you've been working in security. So, what I'm going to do now is change this interview to be focused on what do you know about security rather
mm,
than anything else on your CV. So we spent the next hour just talking about security, how we could secure the university better, what are the things I would suggest. And as he was walking out of the interview, apart from saying that I think you got the job, he also said, two of the things you shared with me today, I'm going to implement. So,
oh,
and,
wow.
and, and the key thing for me there was recognizing that you don't let anything you're doing be wasted. Like if I had just done
Mm,
security and just like, oh, it's not who I am. I'm not. I'm an engineer. Why am I doing this? And I didn't really pay attention to the processes and the things that were involved in that. Then I would have been in that interview and have nothing to say, right? But
mhm.
because I'd actually put my whole self into it, and I think this is to answer your question around value, by
Yeah.
putting your whole self into it and showing up and being present, I understood the concept of security. I had a vast experience, and I could spend 45 to 50 minutes talking about security and actually say enough sense that a person who was more experienced than me decided he was going to take two things away from what I did. And actually, by the time I got the job and started working, he called me into his office and said, "You remember what you said? Here are the two things, and I've implemented them." And I think that's a very small story that kind of reflects all through my career over almost 30
Mhm,
years of actually being present in the roles you're doing, understand the company you're working for, and adding value. So I think value, um, being able to add value and give value comes from being present and being aware. Maybe one more thing before I hand back to you is the power of mentorship. So,
mm,
like, I got my first job as a security guard. I came from Nigeria where I only had one understanding of security. My understanding of security was Megad, the guys that
mhm,
guard your house. But actually, when I got to the job, I met a lady called Amanda. She was my first mentor when it came to work. And she kind of job mentored me, helped me understand what it means to do the job. And she helped me do the job well that I got promoted in the job. That was not because I knew how to do it. I learned from her and she was able. So I would say being present is the first thing and focus on adding value is the first thing for me. And then the second thing is leveraging the power of mentorship. So
wow.
those would be the two things
Powerful.
that I think have helped me get to where I am now to be a person of value.
Oh, wow. Powerful. I have two questions for you
Yeah.
as follow-up to that. Um, what do you think are some of the mistakes that younger people going into the workforce now make around some of what you have said? In your case, it was a physical uniform that could have limited you. And it's not always, I know it's not always a uniform. That uniform could just have framed a mindset for you, and you chose not to have that mindset that would have limited you. But what are some of the mistakes that younger people you think make when maybe they're in a position they did not um, plan for, when they're on their way to where they believe they ought to be, and they just seem to be stuck in this interim place? That's my first question. The second question, which isn't really tied to that, but it's tied to
Yeah.
the last thing you said about mentorship. You are now a coach and a mentor. I would like you to tell us a bit about your journey. Why did you decide that, okay, it's now time for me to start coaching people, to start mentoring people, and how did that journey look like for you?
Okay. So the first question is maybe, I know you've asked this specifically about young people, but I think it's true about anybody. Maybe more so our younger generation, but I think it's true about anybody. I think the problem is that people tend to have a short-term view on everything.
Mm,
And so there's no end state mindset. So they come into an
mm,
environment and they don't think, hey, what does this mean? And I
mm,
always use two professions as a good example. If you want to be a doctor, on day one, year one, you're not going to be given the big operations because you have to be trained and get experience and learn. And I always say to people, what time are you on your career timeline? Like if you're at the beginning, then you are at the beginning. Right? If you're at the beginning of your career, there are certain
mm,
things that you're going to have to do that you might even think are beneath you because I'm a graduate. Why
mm,
should I do that? Like if you join a consulting company, the first thing they're going to ask you to do is run paper errands and set up things that you think, oh, why am I doing this?
mm,
Because it's all part of the process of being able to do something repeatably easy.
mm,
And as you grow more experience, you go up the ladder. And I think the mistake that a lot of people make is they take where they are now and don't look about where they would like to be. So
yeah.
when I joined, let me give you an example. When I joined GlaxoSmithKline, my very first thing I did was, okay, where am I in the so this is which was later on after I finished at the university. I went to work at the College of Law, then eventually ended up with GlaxoSmithKline, a pharmaceutical company, as a programmer. And the first thing I did was, okay, where am I in the pecking order of the organization? Where am I on the
Mm,
salary band? How do I get promoted? These are questions I asked on day one. By day two, I was sitting down with my boss's boss and saying, how long will it take me to get promoted? And he said it's going to take me 5 years. And I was like, it shouldn't take me 5 years. And so I'm like, if I throw myself into it, really get involved, really get engaged, it shouldn't take me 5 years. And the reality is that within 5 years that I was in the organization, I had three promotions. And so I
wow.
think part of what happens is where are you trying to get to? And what does this job mean in the context of your big picture? So this
Mm,
job could be a holding job, like you're doing it because you just have to pay rent, or you just have to kind of get over a hurdle or finish your studies. But even then, you need to throw yourself into it because what you leverage from that is going to be very helpful for you in future. I was listening to a
mm,
lady today who was talking about she had a career break, and actually what she then did while she was on a career break, she learned how to manage stakeholders by working for a non-profit. She turned
mm,
that experience into something that helped her pivot into a job later on. And so
mm,
no time is wasted, no job, no role is wasted. And there are some things you have to do to I don't want to use the concept of climbing the ladder because the reality is that the ladder seems to have disappeared now. And, some people have different routes to get to where they need to get to. I work a lot now
mm,
with startups who are very young, who don't have that experience. But the most important thing, and I think one of the benefits of being in a Western society when you're working, is the value of experience. Like
mm,
value that your experience has value. And
yeah.
if you take time to build experience, and the reality that experience takes time to build, guess what? Later in life, it will come into play and come to help you. So maybe to kind of summarize that answer, what I'm saying is that a lot of people don't value the power of an experience,
Mm,
and they don't realize that what you're going through today could potentially be of value tomorrow. I give you an example. I was working with one bank, doing one thing with one bank, walking to an interview with another bank, and it was easy for me to say, oh, what you guys are trying to do is what this bank did 18 months ago. And so I
mm,
can help you navigate it. And because I threw myself into it and I have that experience, it was easy for me to walk into the next role. So I think there's an element of I think what's missing in this generation is trying to be in a hurry to get to the top, whatever the top is in their mind. Two is to not value experience and not realize that if you're going to run a marathon, you have to be able to have run a 100 meter, a 200 meter, a 400 meter, an 800 meter. All those things take time. You don't just get up one day and say, I'm going to run a marathon. You don't just get up
mm,
one day and be, I want to be a vice president or I want to be a CEO. You could in the startup culture, but your lack
mm,
of experience will definitely show up later
mm,
on. So I think
mm.
gaining experience and valuing experience, I think is one thing that the younger generation, and actually some people who are not young, miss out on,
Yeah.
particularly if they're
Yeah.
transitioning from one country to another country. There's certain things
Mm,
you need to understand about the culture, about the way work works in a different context. And
mm,
taking time to have that experience is a valuable thing to have. So that's your first question. Your
mm,
second question is much more dynamic and bigger, but um, here's what I would say. I think I've always defined a mentor as somebody who has been somewhere that you want to go and can
mm,
show you a shortcut or a pathway that gets you there quicker. And that's why mentoring is very different from coaching. So I
mm,
always like to find the two because people mix them up. A mentor is somebody who's been where you want to be. Like, let's say you want to become a senior executive and you are a graduate place, if somebody in a graduate placement, a senior executive who's been there already can say, okay, when I was going through this, these are some of the experiences I had to learn. These are some of the areas I had to divert into. These are some of the people I had to network with. Here are the things that are going to get you to where you need to go. That's what a mentor does. Shows you the pathway to get to where you want to go.
mm,
A coach, on the other hand, is someone that comes alongside you and says, hey, Pastor May, uh, I see you have a budding career. I want to help you on. So come on, they're going to cheer you on. They haven't been to where you want to get to, but they can definitely show you how to get there.
yeah.
All right. So, and
Okay.
maybe let me bring that down to some live experiences.
Mhm,
I'll probably just share two. So the first one is probably the most pivotal moment in my career. I was a senior manager in a consulting firm, and I was getting ready to move to becoming a director. And I went for the initial screening. And when I finished the screening, I basically failed the screening. Like,
mm,
I had the wrong mindset. Like when you move from a senior manager to become a director, your mindset has to change. And my mindset was, hey, I'm a very good senior manager, and
yeah.
that's enough to be a good director. But during the screening process, they proved to me that beyond a shadow of a doubt, I was not ready. In fact, the partner sat me down on a couch, I can mentally still remember, and said to
Mm,
me, there are alternatives to your career. Like, you don't have to become a director. And
director.
actually, based on the results of your test today, I don't think you will ever be a director
Oh
in this.
wow. Mm,
But maybe with some mentoring and coaching, maybe you might get there. But your results were woeful. So
mm,
I go back to head office, sit down with my boss, and my boss says to me, I know the coach for you. I know the mentor for you.
mm,
And there was a guy called Barry. He's still my mentor today. I met with him yesterday. And Barry basically says to me, I've been doing this role for 20 years. I know what I'm doing. I don't know you from Adam. They said you're good, but you need to prove it to me that you're good. And actually, the way he coached me and mentored me meant that when I did finally sit for the panel for director, I got the best result in the whole of the company,
oh
right?
wow.
So it's a big transformation
Yeah.
from being bottom of the class, there is no way you will ever make it,
Yes.
to being, wow, why did we wait so long to make you a director? And the difference was mentorship. It was somebody who he knew where I was trying to get to, he knew how to get there, and all he did was take me on the journey for me to get there with him. And I would say that was probably one of the most transformational experiences in my career, because this person really just invested in me. But it was easy for him because he had done this many times. He knew what he was
Mm,
doing. He knew where I was trying to get to. So it was very easy for him to navigate me to it. And just out of interest, and just because I feel nostalgic at the moment, I remember walking into his office and he said, so what do you do? And I just blabbered out for 2 minutes, all these acronyms, all these things. And he looked at me and he said, try again, but make sure my grandmother in a
oh,
pub will understand what you just said.
understand.
And until you can describe your elevator pitch in a way that my grandmother can understand it, you don't know what you're doing. And it was a very humbling experience because I was going in thinking I'm the best of the best, and he was like, "No, sir, you're not."
Not yet.
So yeah, so I think that's the power of mentorship. People who can actually in, impact your trajectory. Now, because I have been a benefactor of
Mm,
mentorship, I have had over 10 mentors in my life that have
mm,
really impacted my journey in different ways. I decided that as part of my process, I should give back. And I
mm,
started off doing this as a free service, and I did it for maybe like 8 years as a free service. And then one day, one of my mentees was sitting across the table from me, and she said, actually, I think you should make this into a business. And it was on that basis that we reformatted it to become Josh Leadership Academy. So I hope I've
mm.
answered your two questions in a long stretch there.
Oh, wow. I have a follow-up question to that
Okay.
last answer. Now, can you speak about the responsibilities of a mentee in a mentorship relationship,
Yeah.
and speak about the kind of mindset that makes a mentorship relationship successful? And I'm talking about the mindset of the mentee, um,
Yeah.
now.
And I think for me, I came to this after a long experience myself. And I didn't realize that everybody didn't do what I was doing. So as a mentee, I felt it was my responsibility to find time with the mentor. I took on
Mm,
the responsibility. But when I became a mentor, I realized that people didn't do that. People almost felt like it was the mentor's responsibility to chase you up. And I'm like, no, 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 it's the wrong way around. Like it's you who wants help from the mentor that needs to find time. You need to book the. So I think when you talk about the responsibility of the mentee, I think the mentee has a lot of responsibility. Number one, you need to know where you're trying to go. Like if you come to me and you don't have a 1 5 year long-term plan, we're not going to have a long conversation because you don't know where you're going. So how can I mentor you to where you need to go to?
yes.
So I think your responsibility to understand where you want to go, because once you know where you want to go, if I've been there, I can easily take you there. That's the first thing. Second thing is that I feel that the mentee owns the relationship as much as possible, because it's you, the mentee, who's looking for input from the mentor. So
Mm,
it's on you to kind of make sure you're following up. When I started mentoring, I was the one always following up my mentees. And then I realized actually that's not the right way, because if you're doing that, what happens is that you're spending all your life chasing and you don't really know when your
yeah.
job is done. Right. So
Yes.
it's the mentee that really knows the value of a mentor. Right. So even
Mm,
when I left PricewaterhouseCoopers, I went to my mentor. I said, look, I don't want to leave you. Like I've left the company, but I want to still you to still be my
mm,
mentor. And so therefore it's on me to foster that relationship. It's on me to be present to kind of make sure that I can get what I need from that relationship. So I think there is a lot of responsibility on the mentee, because at the end of the day, you're the one who needs the support and the help. Now, it does go two ways, because at the end of the day, if there's a good mentor mentee relationship, then it becomes a mutually beneficial. Like I enjoy mentoring you, you enjoy being mentored by
mm,
me, and guess what happens? There is chemistry, and
mm,
chemistry leads to good results. And good results means
mm,
that as a mentee, I also want to say thank you to you, whether
mm,
it's paid or even unpaid. I still want to say thank you because you have an impact on my life. And I think a
mm,
lot of people take that for granted, and they almost use their mentors, and they
mm,
forget one very important thing. If you choose a mentor who is successful, they probably are limited on time,
mm,
right? So you not valuing their time devalues the relationship. So I do
yes.
think that a mentee should value the time that they're spending with the mentor, come prepared for the conversation, do homework that has been asked of you. So there's quite a lot. And I don't want to overplay the role of the mentee, but I do think if the mentee plays their role very well and you've selected a good mentor, that relationship just really, really gels well, and you really move things forward. And every mentor that I've had, I've been privileged, I think, every mentor that I've had, we've had this good dynamic that I come prepared, I come ready, they give their inputs, they ask questions, they give me challenge, I take on the challenge. I don't take it personally. I recognize that the challenge, like even the other day, my mentor was saying to me about something I was doing and said, look, I have a bias, he said, that I don't like this. But I'm just telling you that if you want to do it, just be careful of X, Y, Z. And it's how my response to that is what is most important. So I love the concept of mentoring, and I think it has the power to transform one's career. And I think we only learn from other people's stories. And if you have a good mentor, you will be inspired by their stories.
Wow. Um, so you said that you've had 10 mentors over
Yes.
the course of your career. I want to ask a question about how you have managed that, but I want to add a little caveat to that. Now, you and I, we both straddle two worlds, or
Yeah.
I'm more in the church space now, nonprofit management space. I'm a pastor fully,
Yeah.
and but you're a pastor as well, and you're a pastor, you've been a pastor
Yeah.
for many years, as well as a career person. One of the things that I've noticed in mentoring relationship, maybe more in the pastoring space, is the emotional connection that can develop to such an extent that when a mentee, wants to adopt a new mentor just
Yeah.
based on where they're headed now, um, some insecurities often need to be managed
Yes.
um, on the side of the mentor. How can you speak to that? Can you give some advice to mentors or aspiring mentors on how to release people or give people room in a healthy manner where you don't have to be the sole mentor in their lives and you don't have to feel devalued because they need to move on?
Yeah. So I think you're right that in particular spaces, um, people get attached to their mentees because they derive value from that relationship. So
Yeah.
in one way, it's a good thing, but then it leads to a bad practice. So I think mentoring in the non-corporate world, or I think lacks one concept, right? And that concept is the concept of promotion and progress. So in the church world, most of the time, there's not a lot of place for you to go. So like,
Mm,
if you've been mentoring me for 10 years, how do I know that now I've outgrown you or I've gotten to your level? Because there's a very parental additional element that comes in the non-corporate sector. Whereas in the corporate sector, you would sometimes outgrow your mentor, right? So if you are on the same level with your mentor, or sorry, if your mentor is one level above you and you get promoted, by default in the workplace, you almost need a new mentor because
mm,
by definition of mentor, they're taking you to where they have been and showing you shortcuts to get
mm,
there. So I like to use consulting because it's a very structured environment. If you go in as a manager and your mentor at the time is a senior manager and they mentor you well and you become a senior manager, guess what? They can't be your mentor anymore. They could be your peer coach or your peer, but they're not your mentor anymore because you're now both on the same level, right? And so in the workplace, sometimes it's a lot easier to see when you need to transition to a new mentor because your level, your growth determines that next level. And
yeah.
actually, organizations like PwC, Deloitte already build this into their career framework that at a certain
Mm,
stage, you need a mentor. They actually say you need a mentor who is two steps ahead of you. So if you're a senior manager, you need to be mentored by a partner because
mm,
it gives you room to grow, it gives you room to be promoted, and also means that you don't catch up with your mentor too quickly. So I think, and I say that to say this, that in the non-corporate world, we don't have those ladders to say, okay,
mm,
if I'm mentoring a pastor, how do I know when the pastor is now at a place where I can't actually coach and mentor them? Right?
mm,
And it could be size of church, it could be direction of travel, it could be many,
yeah.
many things. And I think I think in the non-corporate space, that is what sometimes causes the cloud because
mm,
um, it's very hard to distinguish between
mm,
levels. Right? We don't have
yes,
clear levels. So that I say all of that to say this, that I think in the non-corporate space, mentors need to be more. I think the ownership falls on the mentor to be
okay,
more aware as to, hold on a second, what's going on in your life, and am
mm,
I the right person to be mentoring you in that? So there's people that come to
mm,
me and say, "Oh, mentor me in my career." I like to do the whole, you know, a whole take a holistic approach to mentoring because I feel that your marriage will impact your career, your your marriage will impact your career, your finances will impact your career. I think they all have an impact. But if you came to me and said, "Hey, I'm about to buy my fifth house, can you coach me?" And I'm like, well, I haven't bought my fifth house. I've bought a house, but I haven't bought my fifth house. So I think at this point, you need somebody who's probably got 10 houses to be somebody to mentor and go. And I have done that many times where I've given people over to other people. One, because I think they've outgrown what I can add value to them. And two,
mm,
they might be going through a predicament that I haven't been through.
mm,
And I don't feel competent to coach them in that because I haven't been where they're trying to go to. Spiritual advice is different from mentoring. Just give me a
mm,
second. So I
mm,
think so I think it's really about the mentor recognizing and being aware of the relationship that they have with the mentee to know
mm,
when to ask them to move on in their journey. And I
mm,
think that's the biggest challenge. It's recognizing that, hey, I've added some value to you. This relationship needs to move to another level, and I'm not the right person to do it. And the best thing any mentor can do, and that's happened to me once when I was working in GlaxoSmithKline, my mentor at the time, Belinda Quinn, said to me, if you really want to spend more time in the HR practice, you need to get another mentor.
mm,
And I will suggest to you that you go to this lady called Ann Jones. And
mm,
so she actually directionally led me to say, look, because it looks like you want to go deeper in this space, I'm telling you that it might be worth you going to this other person to get mentoring. And that's what I did. I did move. But I still maintained a good relationship with Belinda, but it's just that she wasn't now my point of contact for where I was going to go in my career. So I think
mm,
understanding the role that you play as a mentor will really help you to know and be recognized and say, hold a second, I'm not adding much value to you anymore. And,
yeah,
and that's a internal thing. Like the mentee might know that already and just be showing up for the meeting. It's like, well, we're not really getting anywhere. I'm not getting what I want. But I think if the mentor has that understanding, then they can easily move you on. Or
mm,
this is a cop out because people will say, well, as long as the mentor keeps growing, yeah, but you can keep growing, but you 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 might just be growing at the same pace as your mentee, and
yeah,
you want somebody to be mentoring you who's kind of outpaced you in that sense.
mm,
Did I answer your
yeah.
question?
Oh, very, very well. Thank you.
Yeah,
That was a
yeah,
very comprehensive answer to that question. Let's switch to
okay.
another um, aspect of your life, and you are an angel investor. Can you
Yeah.
tell us what that is all about? What does that mean? How did you get started? And maybe a little bit of what you see yourself doing in the
Becoming.
future,
Yeah,
you becoming in that
yeah.
space. Yeah.
So I stumbled into angel investing is the way I would say it. I think during COVID, I recognized and saw. Okay, let me tell you the whole story. So during COVID, there was this tool that came up called Clubhouse. I don't know
Mm.
whether you heard about Clubhouse. So
Yes.
I found myself on Clubhouse, like many of us did, and the rooms I was going into were more around Africans investing in Africa for Africa, and the fact that there was
Mm.
a lack of investment, there was a lack of mentoring, there was a lack of coaching. There are a lot of startups were failing because they were not getting the
Mm.
right people of color were not in the
Okay.
investment space. And
Mm.
through one of those rooms, I stumbled across a book by a guy called Tino. and it's called The Black Opportunity. You can find it on Amazon. Anyway, it's called The Black Opportunity by Tino. And Tino basically explains what was happening in the Belgium market, where there's a lot of there's very few startup ideas, so very few black founders, very few investors, angel investors, and very few venture capitalists. So actually, we keep saying that Africans should get funded, but they can't if there's no people of color like them in the room pointing at them to say, "Hey, why don't we invest in this idea?" So that's
Let,
kind of
let
how.
me let me break you, and I'm sorry
Yeah,
to do this real quickly. Can you tell us what an angel investor is
yeah,
and what a venture
capitalism. Yeah.
capitalist is?
So an angel investor is somebody who invests in an organization that is at the idea stage, what we call pre-seed, or the seed stage. So an idea has formed, they are prototype. So an angel investor comes in almost just after friends and family. So if you start a
Mm,
business, the first thing you go to is you go to your friends and family and say, "Hey guys, can we put some money together? Help me, move this idea on." And they do. But once you want to get a little bit more serious and you want an injection of capital, you would approach angel investors. Now, an angel investor has grades. So you could have an angel investor investing from $5,000 all the way up to a very strong one up to $1 million, right? That's your range. So that's angel investing. But the very big focus is around ideation, pre-seed, and seed. Venture capitalists, on the other hand, are people that kind of start writing bigger checks for, maybe starting at over 100K all the way up to billions. And a venture capitalist is more an organization. So where an angel investor is 9 times out of 10 an individual. There could also be a syndicate of angel investors, but 9 times out of 10 is one individual who is investing their own money. Whereas a venture capitalist is somebody who is taking other people's money and investing it on their behalf through an
mm,
organization, through a company. So those are the two differences between the two.
mm,
And most of the time, what happens is that angel investors graduate over time to join a venture capital organization, or
mm,
are invited to join a venture capital, or their experience as angel investors lead them to become venture capitalists. Now, very important notes, like a disclaimer. I think financial things always have the disclaimer, is that angel
mm,
investment is the most risky investment you can ever make. It's more risky than investing in stocks and shares. It's even more risky than putting your money in savings, because you can invest in an idea and the idea doesn't get off the ground. And they always say that when you go into angel investing, you must invest with money that you're
mm.
happy to eventually
To let
lose.
go.
Now,
Mm,
there are some rules you can apply that helps you not lose every time. And actually, the reality is that if you hit gold, potentially you become a multimillionaire. Potentially. So
mm,
if you think
mm,
about the first guys that invested in companies like Uber, they only invested 5 grand, 10 grand. But over time, that 5 grand, 10 grand has become millions. And there's actually,
mm,
I think, if you Google the initial investors in Uber, they show you a list of how much they actually put in and how much
mm.
what they put in is now worth today. So
Yeah,
I
powerful,
think I've
powerful.
answered that question. Yeah.
Yes, powerful. And could you please continue with your own story? Um,
Yeah. So
and
um,
say,
based on this book called The Black Opportunity,
yes,
made me realize that actually there was an opportunity in this space. So I started
mm,
off more as advisor. So I started
mm,
advising startups that I
okay,
had met on the platform. That advisory then led to becoming equity owners in some of these businesses. And then I thought to myself, actually, I should go one step further and begin to actually invest cash, my own cash, into
mm,
organizations that I really believed in. And
mm,
the way I do it, I kind of copy the model that the company I worked for is, which is I invest in people rather than an idea or a product. So I kind
mm,
of like, hey, after me, I like you as a person. I like what you're trying to do. I like your idea, but actually, I'm investing in you. So I'm
mm,
putting my money into you. So if it fails, it's fine because I know that
mm,
my investment was more
was
in
it?
you rather
Mm,
than the idea you had. It's more like I
Okay.
believe in you as a person. And
Mm,
yeah, so that's kind of how I got into it. And almost 2 years in now, and every day gets better and better. And you learn a lot along the way, and you learn things that you don't know. And again, you need mentorship and coaching. And yeah, and if you're lucky, your mentor has some experience in that space, and they really help you. But it's a fun space to be in. It's not for the faint-hearted, but it potentially could yield great results. And I think the most important thing about anything you do in life is to be clear on the reason why you're doing it. Like
doing
if you're
it. Wow.
very clear that the reason why you're doing it, like for me, the reason why I'm doing it is because I just want to ensure that people with good ideas who are of
Mm,
African descent get the opportunities that affords them to grow an idea to a place where it could potentially be successful. And the reality is that the statistics says it, I think 3% of the total money that's invested in startups goes to black founders. 3%.
mm.
And it's
Wow,
actually
that
much
is very
smaller when it comes to women.
calling. Yeah,
So yeah, it's
yeah,
a very small number.
very,
Yeah.
very small. So, how would you rate your appetite for risk?
My
Just a.
appetite for risk. Wow. I think you can rate my appetite for risk from my stock investment. So my
Mm,
appetite for risk when it comes to stock is I'm a dividend. So I will only, I generally only, or I prefer to invest. Majority of my investments will be in stocks that give dividend, because my
mm,
view is that if I invest £1,000 in a company, as long as they're paying dividends, I might not get my £1,000 back. But if the dividend is good, over time, it will,
mm,
you know, balance out. So I would say my appetite for risk, if I'm asking your question directly, is probably medium. So I still need facts and figures. I'm not going to go on blind faith. And I tend to walk away from deals, particularly with angel investment, where you're trying to sell me the moon and the star. This is $1 million investment. I'm like, yeah, but do you have a minimum viable product? No. Do you have any revenue? No. Has anybody bought from you? No. And I'm like, okay, I'm out. And to kind of to kind of help me, there's a book I read called Why Do Startups Fail? And in
mm,
that book, it really teaches you how to distinguish from what looks like a good startup and would potentially go forward, and what looks like a risky investment. And 90%
mm.
of the time, it always depends on the viewpoint of the startup owner. Like,
Wow.
yeah, because if the viewpoint of the startup owner is, we're going to get there in the end, um, then you at least believe that they're willing to go step by step. But if somebody
Mm.
starts with they haven't even got out of the gate and they're gonna be, I'm gonna be the next Uber, I'm gonna be the next Amazon. I'm like, Uber didn't know they were gonna be Uber. Amazon didn't know they were gonna be
That's
Amazon.
a very good
you know.
point.
So what they were doing was they were doing what they knew how to do, and with time they grew and became what they became. So and they didn't have Amazon didn't have, oh, I'm gonna be the next Amazon. Amazon just like, we're gonna try this idea, see if it works, and keep scaling it until we get to a place where we're told to stop. And so therefore they didn't have a template. They might have had some ideas, they could have seen Barnes and Nobles, but for what Amazon did, they did it because no one else was doing it.
Mm,
And one of the things I do not like as an investor or somebody who's coaching a startup is copycat ideas, right?
mm.
Because copycat ideas, you're basically saying you want to be the next Amazon. And I'm like, I can tell you straight up, you're not going to be the next Amazon. Not because I'm a prophet, but I'm just saying that if you're trying to be something, then you're never going to be it,
Yeah,
because you can't copy what Amazon has done,
that's
not
done.
not in our lifetime, right? But if you come up with a unique idea that might be leveraging off what Amazon is doing, but you're going in a different direction,
Yeah,
you got my backing, right? Because
yeah.
I know that you're intentionally trying to do something that's unique, and I think it's the uniqueness of a startup that leads to what do you call it? That leads to success.
To success,
Um,
yeah.
is that
Mm.
is that a helpful answer?
Very, very helpful. Very helpful.
Yeah.
even more than I had in mind when I asked that question.
One
Let's pivot. Okay, go ahead.
before you
Finish. Mm,
pivot, let me just
yeah.
link something for you because
Mm,
a concept that I've been playing with recently is the whole concept of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, right? So people who
mm,
are doing the career journey within an organization. And the idea and the concept is that we need more people in organizations to think like an entrepreneur, to
yeah.
think about unique ideas, to think about
Mm,
how can I do my job differently. You don't have to be a startup to have a startup. You can be a startup provider within an organization. And I've done that a couple of times. I've started,
mm,
lines of services that didn't
yeah.
exist by
Mm,
having a hunch, by having an idea that if I was spun off as a business, it would have been a $10
mm, okay.
million business.
Mm,
And I think
mm,
we need more people
okay.
to be within organizations and be entrepreneurs, like have this entrepreneurial mindset, this startup mindset to start something
Mm,
new, something unique, do the same job you've been doing for the last 2 years, do add a secret sauce to it, do something different
yes.
and begin to add a different kind of value. And guess
Mm,
what will happen? You will help that organization to grow and you would
mm,
grow yourself, right? You would actually grow yourself. And depending on what your end game is, because everybody has different end games. Like some people
mm,
want to one day be a founder of their own company. Well, the
mm,
best way to practice that is where you're already in an organization and you're practicing the principles of being an
mm-hmm.
entrepreneur.
Yes. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much for that. I thought of a few questions I could ask,
Yeah.
uh, you know, to build upon some of those ideas you shared, but I won't. I'll pivot.
Okay.
You talked about reading quite a bit, and I know that you're
Yes.
an avid reader. You are also an author. I will ask two questions. My first question is how you get the time in your busy schedule to read as much as you do. The second question is about your journey as an author, how you started and how you keep up with that.
Yeah. So reading, I think you have to make time for it. Now, I used to travel a lot. I still travel a lot. So I always use my travel time as my reading time. That's my biggest reading time. But it also turns out to be my writing time. So if I'm writing, I
Mm,
probably write on a long plane journey or a long train ride. But I think you have to make time for reading if you understand the value of reading. I always like to quote Dr. Seuss that says, the more you read, the more places you will go,
you go.
right? So if you read, you would kind of learn, your brain
Mm,
expands. And
mm,
I try and start every year reading a particular book because I just feel like it just gives me life. There's a book called Winning by the
mm,
coach of Michael Jordan. And that book,
mm,
if the first time I read that book, I threw it across the room. I was like, this is just too deep. I can't handle the truth here. And I threw the book across the room. But actually, I've decided that for the last 2 years that I start my year reading that book, reading those principles again, and the value of winning. So that's kind of my reading. And I think you have to make time for it. I think you
mm,
people don't people keep saying I don't have time, and I will say then find ways. Like if you don't like
mm,
reading paperback, then listen to audiobooks. If you don't like listen to audiobooks, then listen and get a book read to you somehow. Like
yes.
try and find ways that suits your program. A lot of people go running, so put an audiobook in. I don't like audiobooks as much as I like physical copies of a book. I love this whole feel, and
Yeah.
also maybe because I had dyslexia, I almost feel
Mm,
like for me to really value a book, I need to kind of be able to write in it, underline, and helps with my memory.
mm,
So
mm.
find what works for you, but definitely read, 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 read. So that's that. So as an author, I think I my journey as an author started in secondary school when you go into a biology class and they talk, 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 talk. So what I would do when I get home is I take my biology textbook or my chemistry textbook and rewrite it out, right? And the more I wrote it out,
Amazing.
the more I was able to
Mm,
retain information.
retain it.
So I became
Mm,
a writer more by just writing actually. So I just wrote out. I didn't know that I was probably coping with my dyslexia at the time because it wasn't diagnosed until much later in life. But that was
mm,
probably
mm,
how I coped with it. So I wrote out
mm,
what I was reading and I write it out. And the more I wrote it out, the more I retained that information. And it was easy for me to write it out in exams. So that's the first.
mm,
So that's kind of how I came into writing. And then
Wow.
when I became a Christian, one way to voice what was in my heart was to start writing articles. Articles led to books when I was on university campus. And yeah, so that's kind of how I got into it. And then maybe during COVID, I realized that I'd written so many, maybe five Christian books, but I'd never written a business book. So me and another pastor, we joined, worked on one book together, and then that led to me writing my first business book, which is called Managing Up for Career Progression. And it just talks about my journey of my career and how I had to manage my managers to get to where I got to in life. And I'm now writing another book right now called How to Manage Sudden Change in Your Career Journey. So it's being written, and yeah, so that's kind of my journey. And I think everybody has, I have this feeling, it's a feeling, it's not a fact, it's a feeling that everybody has a book in them, right? The
Mm,
question is how and when are you going to get it out? Because if you
yeah.
don't write your own book, somebody might decide to write a biography about you, um, or you might want to write your own story.
On story. Wow,
Yeah. So
that's interesting.
yeah,
Before I wrote my last book, Dear Pastor's Wife, somebody had asked me if I would write another book, and I had said this was a very foolish statement, by the way,
yeah.
disclaimer. I'd said that no, I'm not writing any other book. So many people are writing books, and too few people are reading them. And I chuckled at myself when I eventually went ahead and wrote
The
that
second.
book a couple of years ago. Um,
Yeah.
so it's interesting that you say that everyone has a book in them. So how, anyway, this is a market. How are they going to market those books when we have everybody writing books? Or what should the purpose of writing a book be that you are getting out what's in you and not be so much about how many people are going to buy it, how many people are going to read it? What's your take on that?
I, I strongly believe that your personal definition of success will impact how you see success of a book, right?
Yeah.
So here's my take. Like, I don't know. Like, and
Mm.
I don't want to say something foolish, like you said. I don't want to say something foolish. I very much doubt that my book, while I'm alive, let me say this, will be a bestseller on the New York bestseller list. I very much doubt
Mm.
that.
Mm.
But I do believe that the power of my story
Yeah.
can transform a life. And so
Mm.
I come from the point of view of that the power of the story I've written or the power of my book, I've written it for the audience of one. And I'll give you a very good example. I was on a flight from, where was I coming from? I was on a flight from Amsterdam to Berlin. So it's about an hour, 30 minutes, thereabouts, in good weather. And a lady next to me, we started talking about books, and she saw I was reading a book. I'm reading a book at the moment called Leaders Eat Last, a very
Mm.
powerful book by Simon Sinek. And so she was asking me about the book, and I said, "Oh, it's a big book, but I like writing small books." She said, "Oh, you're an author." I said, "Yes, I am." So, and I pull out one of my books. Always have a copy of your book with you. It's your calling
Mm.
card, and I pass it
Mm.
to her. And I tell you this, and it's happened to me a few times. Before the end of the flight, she had finished reading the book.
Mm.
And there and then, in the moment, she's telling me what she had learned from the book and the fact that she needs to take this book down to her husband and how there's so many parallels in my story and her husband's story.
Oh, wow.
And and then I'm just sitting there thinking, she didn't pay for the book. I gave her
Yeah.
the book. She even
Yeah.
asked me at the end, do I want the book back? Do I want her to pay for it? And I just felt in that
Exactly.
moment, in that
Mm.
incident, I felt like if this was the only reason why I wrote this
I
book,
wrote that book. Yeah.
then
Wow.
I'm leaving this conversation satisfied that I have definitely in a small way impacted one person's story.
Wow.
Where that story then ends up, I'm not really sure, right? And I'm not really too bothered. I'm just thrilled that I was able to be part of that story. And I'll tell you one more story, and then you kind
Yeah.
of get where I'm coming from when with
Yes.
this. And the
Mm.
second story for me was a guy. I told him to buy my book. He bought it. He read it. when he finished reading it, he actually went on LinkedIn and wrote like a paragraph of how the book had transformed his thinking. Not only that, that he now realized that actually he has dyslexia, and actually the reason why he was
Mm.
failing at his job was because he the root cause wasn't dealt with. So within a week,
Mm.
he had resigned from his job, and because he now understood himself better, got a job that he could see himself thriving in, and he
Mm.
literally did a pivot on the back of a book. And so for me, I
Wow.
see books, particularly and I think it's true of my Christian books also. I think I see my books as a continuation and extension of my mentoring and coaching, and hopefully it would transform a life. And now,
Mm.
while it's transforming one life, they might recommend it to somebody else, or somebody else might buy it. But the intention for me is that audience of one that will actually have an impact. And I've been around. We've been around long enough to know that actually Chinua Achebe is dead, but people still read Things Fall Apart,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's the power of a book. That's if
Mm.
you realize that the potency in a book isn't necessarily just in the writing of the book. It's about the existence of the book. And there are some books that people would never hear the name of the book, but they've
Mm.
literally transformed people's lives. People are
Mm.
doctors today because they read somebody's story. There are some people who
Mm.
are business owners today because they read somebody's story. And I just think that there's not enough books in the world, right? I
Yeah.
can walk into a bookshop, which I did recently, and I looked at the shelf. I was in Colorado. I looked up and I was like, I don't know any of these authors. I've never read any of these books. And so that tells me that the world is full of books that
Yeah, but
I may
that,
never read, but
yeah.
there's going to be somebody that's going to read
Mm.
it and be totally, let me use the Christianese, totally blessed by it and their life transformed by it. So I believe that every author has to have a purpose for why they're writing. And we all have different purpose. My purpose is to impact just one person. And if I can do that, and in the mean and doing that, sell a few copies more of the book, then it's great. It's great gain for me. Whereas the other people that their number one intention is to write a bestseller, and most of the time they do succeed and they do write a bestseller. I was listening to Rick Warren talk about purpose-driven life and how he wrote that book, and he said
Mm.
there's nobody more surprised about than him that that book has actually sold 50 million copies as of
Amazing.
2019 and has been translated to 85. Apparently, it is the most translated book
Wow.
in the world apart from the Bible,
Oh
right?
my. Oh
So the Bible
wow.
is the only
Oh my
book that's been
word.
more translated than Purpose
Yes.
Driven Life. And
Mm.
and he said in the
Wow.
interview that he is one of the most surprised people about the success of the book. But anybody who's
Oh,
read that book would know that it has a transformational impact
impact.
on their
Yeah.
life.
Wow.
And so sometimes you have a book like that, but if you don't
Mm.
cultivate the habit of writing, you might never find the purpose driven life, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so
Wow.
that's what I feel about
Powerful.
books.
Powerful. And I believe I met you through I met you through my husband, or I
Yes.
heard of you through my husband, but I think I really met you through your writing
Yes.
many, many years ago. So thank you for continuing to write and inspire and
Thank
talk about stories that inspire. Thank you for all the stories you shared on the show today. I have been inspired. I loved what you said about writing. I have 3 books in the pipeline of my heart that I need
you.
to
Okay.
get serious about. And what you have shared has really inspired me to be more diligent in getting them out. As we close and as we wrap up today, would you share information on how people who are interested can be a part of your leadership and your coaching programs?
So I think the easiest thing to do is to go to www.sola Shola Oshinoiki, so SOLA OSINOIKI.com, And when you get there, that's my landing page. You would see, like at the top right corner, how you can purchase my book, whether you're in the Western world or you're in Africa. There's a way to do it. And then it also has information about my leadership academy, has information about my advisory board, and has information about my consulting organization. So I have people who are more clever than me that have kind of consolidated my story into a URL. And I think that's probably the best way. The other way also is to kind of find me on LinkedIn, but I think sholashinoiki.com would lead you to all the different aspects of my journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being so willing to share your journey with us today on Career Journeys. I hope that I have the opportunity to bring you back because I have a feeling there's so much more you could enlighten us on. Thank you again. And it's been a wonderful time. It's been an absolute delight to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing, telling these different stories and then inspire the next generation.